The morning had a peculiar quality, as if the neon fog that drifted over the colony's floating forests had decided to hang around just to watch Elias Varn make a fool of himself. He squinted against the glowing haze, muttering about how even after 10 years of interstellar service, some mornings felt like a poorly scripted hollow comedy. The communications terminal buzzed insistently, flashing the usual red alert, and Elias snatched it up with a sigh. "What fresh nightmare today?" he asked the empty room. The AI voice, chirpy as a caffeinated sparrow, answered, "Colonial Council reports an incoming threat of unusual magnitude. A Lauren emissary has arrived." Elias tilted his head, lips twitching. Unusual magnitude? How unusual? Like a polite disagreement unusual, or like giant alien stomps on everything unusual? He barely had time to register the distant vibrations before the ground beneath the floating walkways shuddered. The colonists, most of them running late for interdimensional morning briefings or arguing about gravity-defying laundry lines, stopped in their tracks. From the swirling fog emerged a figure that could have starred in half a dozen intergalactic nightmares. A woman, impossibly tall, her long ears brushing against the low-hanging branches of bioluminescent trees, eyes glowing green like twin searchlights scanning for weaklings. She moved with a deliberate grace that made every step a threat and every twitch of her ears a statement. Elias rubbed his jaw, muttering under his breath, "Well, at least she's not asking for my lunch," the colonists screamed. He waved them off. "Relax, I deal with giant things for breakfast, sometimes pancakes." That earned him a few bewildered stares and one low groan from a teenager balancing a tray of NutriPaste. The Lauren woman's voice, deep and resonant, rolled across the forest like a distant thunderstorm. "Human warrior, stand and face me." Elias straightened, squinting up at the impossible height of her. "You could have just sent a postcard," he said, less intimidating. The alien paused, ears flicking, clearly unprepared for humor from a species she considered fragile. "I am Thalira," she said, "and I am your test." "Great," Elias said, adjusting the straps of his utility belt, where he kept a small collection of gadgets designed more for convenience than combat. "Test, that's the word I needed before breakfast. Helps the nerves." He crouched slightly, studying her posture, her long, lean limbs moving with almost casual menace. There was a rhythm to her steps, a pattern that seemed predictable if one paid attention, or completely fatal if one didn't. He noticed a faint shimmer around her boots, subtle energy pulses that hinted at a gravity modulation field, allowing her to stride across the uneven floating platforms without breaking stride. Thalira tilted her head, ears flicking back and forth like twin antennae. Elias decided that maybe humor could be a weapon, or at least a distraction. "So, big lady, do we go with the whole smashing and stomping thing first, or should we talk over tea? I make a mean synth herbal blend, pairs well with dodging death, I hear." The first swing came not with the sound of destruction but with a sigh of mild exasperation, as if Thalira was irritated by his insolence rather than his existence. Elias ducked, rolling to the side, narrowly avoiding a fist that could have easily crushed a small hover car. He sprang to his feet and pointed at a floating rock platform. "Nice day for parkour, huh? I think the colony insurance might disagree, though." Thalira's green eyes narrowed. "You jest even as I strike." Elias grinned. "Jesting is free, you should try it sometime. Loosens the muscles, keeps the ears long." His joke earned him a twitch of her ear and a pause long enough for him to notice the faint shimmer of curiosity mingled with irritation in her gaze. He wondered if she had ever encountered a human who not only dodged her attacks but made her question why she should bother. They circled each other across the floating canopy, him leaping from platform to platform, her strides causing small tremors that sent sparks of ionized dust into the air. He made quips as he moved. "Careful there. That moss is slippery. Last thing you want is to trip in front of a bunch of terrified colonists. Social media would eat you alive." Thalira's lips curved ever so slightly, though she would have denied it to anyone, including herself. As the confrontation wore on, Elias began to notice Thalira's mistakes. A slight overreach, a pause that suggested she expected obedience, not audacity. He realized she had been trained to intimidate, to dominate, but not to think of the other as more than a target. He grinned, plotting a gambit. "Hey, big ears, try this one on for size," he called, hopping onto a precarious plank and swinging a grappling tether around one of her ankles. The tether snagged, yanking her off balance for just a moment. She staggered, but instead of lashing out, she caught herself, ears flicking wildly. "That was unorthodox," she admitted, voice resonating with mild surprise. Elias bowed theatrically. "I aim to innovate, keeps things interesting. Also, it's how I survive mornings like this." He noticed her gaze linger on him, not with fury but with calculation. She was trying to understand him, this tiny, cheeky human who mocked danger and somehow refused to break. The air vibrated with quiet tension, though Elias continued to pepper it with humor. "You know," he said, hopping onto a mossy ledge, "we could settle this over a game of zero-G chess. Less smashing, more thinking. Or maybe we could just race to the top of that floating spire. Loser buys breakfast." Thalira's ears twitched sharply, and for a moment the air seemed to shimmer around her in indecision. Elias took the pause as victory, though the victory was fragile. Then, unexpectedly, a rogue patrol drone zipped between them, its sensors misfiring and weapons sparking dangerously. Both humans and Lauren would have been collateral damage if not for a quick, unplanned cooperation. Elias grabbed a discarded energy net, tossing it to snag the drone, while Thalira's precise movements disarmed its destructive core. They glanced at each other mid-action, and something unspoken passed between them. Trust, or perhaps a grudging admiration. Elias decided it didn't matter to label it, he only knew it was easier to joke now. "Teamwork makes the dream work, big ears, try to keep up next time." Thalira's lips twitched in a semblance of a smile, and her ears flicked with what Elias chose to interpret as approval. "You are unpredictable human warrior," she said. "This is not what I expected." "Good," Elias said, hopping onto a nearby spire. "Expectations are overrated, I prefer surprises, keeps life spicy. Also, I work well under pressure, and caffeine." He waved at the tiny hollow cafeteria on his belt, producing a steaming cup of synth coffee. "Want some?" Thalira froze, considering the absurdity. Elias grinned, feeling a surge of triumph. Not because he had won a fight, but because he had, against all reason, made the alien hesitate, laugh internally, and maybe, even just a little, consider him more than a target. And in that suspended, improbable moment, floating among luminous trees and humming ion clouds, the seeds of something entirely unexpected had been planted. A bond forged not by victory or defeat, but by wit, audacity, and the strange, human habit of laughing at danger. Elias had barely caught his breath when the reality of the situation hit him again. Thalira wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. She stood there, towering and impossibly elegant, her long ears twitching in ways that seemed to punctuate every thought she had. He had spent most of the morning hopping across floating platforms, dodging strikes, and cracking jokes that would have made a stand-up comic blush. But now, standing on a precarious ledge over a chasm of swirling neon fog, he realized humor could only go so far. "Do humans always talk so much when facing annihilation?" she asked, her voice deep, resonant, tinged with that faint echo that suggested she was used to being heard over entire battlefields. Elias balanced on one leg, gesturing with a hand toward the precarious ledge. "Well, someone has to. Silence gets boring, plus it keeps your ears twitching, it's like a dance. You should try it." Thalira's eyes narrowed, but not in anger. Curiosity, he realized, was creeping into her expression. She made her next move with the grace of a predator who had spent centuries perfecting intimidation. One stride and she could have flattened a small hovercar, yet her momentum was measured, almost hesitant. Elias noticed it and grinned. "Oh, come on, you're holding back. You've got this whole giant alien warrior thing down to an art. Don't waste it on me." Her ears twitched in a way that almost looked like amusement. "You are reckless for a human," she said. Elias took a bow, careful not to tumble into the neon fog below. "Reckless, no. Strategic improvisation with a flair for comedy, there's a difference." Their duel became a dance, a strange rhythm of leaps and bounds and quips. Elias used every trick in his arsenal. Grappling hooks, tether lines, quick flips over precarious spires, even a few well-timed distractions in the form of hollow clones that flitted across the platforms. Thalira countered with elegance, her long ears catching the faintest breeze as she pivoted, her massive fists narrowly missing him. At one point, he found himself dangling from an energy conduit, shouting, "I swear I'm not stuck, just creatively hanging." She paused, one foot lightly resting on the edge of the conduit, looking down at him with those piercing green eyes. "You are entertaining," she admitted, her voice carrying a strange note of reluctant respect. Elias twisted, doing a backflip over a glowing moss patch. Thank you, I do try. Some call it gallantry, others call it sheer luck." And then came the moment that would shift everything. A sudden tremor shook the floating canopy, a rogue gravity surge, one of the colony's own experiments gone slightly awry. A platform tilted dangerously under Thalira's foot. In an instant, she would have toppled into the neon mist below if Elias hadn't acted. Without thinking, he launched a tether over her massive arm, yanking her back to stability. "Careful, that's not a dive I'd recommend." For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Thalira's eyes widened and her ears quivered as if trying to decide whether to strike or stay. "You saved me," she said finally. Elias shrugged, grinning despite the tension. "Yep, teamwork. Not my usual style, but I make exceptions." He paused, gesturing to the floating spires around them. "Also, it's hard to let a fight be humdrum when you have someone this animated involved." Something unspoken passed between them then, a subtle shift in the rhythm of the fight. Elias realized that Thalira was no longer purely an opponent. Her strikes became more measured, her movements less about domination and more about testing him. He made jokes midair, laughing as he swung between platforms. "Ever tried zero-G hopscotch? I'll teach you sometime." Her ears twitched and she blinked. A human joke, absurd and clumsy, yet it made her hesitate. The colony drones, ever vigilant, suddenly buzzed toward them, sensors misidentifying the duo as threats to the experimental floating canopy. Thalira reacted instinctively, swiping one aside with a massive hand. Elias, never one to waste a crisis, grabbed a drone's control panel, sending a pulse that caused the rest to spin harmlessly into the mist. He shouted, "See, we make a great team. I provide the brains, you provide, well, the height advantage." She stared at him, ears flicking rapidly, trying to process his audacity. "You are unlike any human I have encountered," she admitted, voice tinged with that same note of curiosity. "Do all of your kind speak incessantly while dodging death?" Elias shrugged mid-flip. "We do. Keeps the heart rate up, nerves sharp, and apparently annoys tall alien warriors." Their movements began to synchronize almost unconsciously, a strange rhythm of mutual understanding. Elias noticed her pauses, the way she tilted her head, the subtleties of her stance. He adapted, leapt, and joked in equal measure. "Ever notice," he said while spinning over a moss-covered platform, "that gravity is really just an opinion?" Thalira's lips twitched again. "Your irreverence is remarkable." By mid-afternoon, the fighting had shifted from deadly combat to a series of challenges, dodges, creative maneuvers, and testing limits. Elias grinned as he dangled upside down from a floating spire. "Your turn, giant ears." "Bet you can't catch me?" She lunged, and he narrowly avoided her grasp, landing on a small platform that wobbled dangerously. Elias looked up at her, catching his breath. "Not bad, huh? I call that a warm-up." For the first time, Thalira laughed, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the fog and floating foliage. It startled Elias, who nearly fell off his platform laughing. "See, humor works every time," he said, steadying himself. "Even if it's terrifying when it comes from someone 3 meters tall." She tilted her head, considering him seriously now. "Perhaps humans are more resilient than assumed, or foolish." Elias grinned. "Call it resilience. Or call it stubbornness with style, whatever floats your massive spire." As the sun dipped behind the floating canopies, the two paused, perched precariously on opposite platforms. Elias offered a hand, not in combat but in camaraderie. "Truce, or at least a pause for dinner?" Thalira considered, then nodded subtly. Her ears twitched, catching the wind like sails. "Perhaps a pause. You have proven yourself interesting." And in that fragile, floating moment, the fight that was meant to humiliate had evolved. Elias, with his reckless humor and unorthodox strategies, had shifted the rhythm. Thalira, the giant warrior with long, expressive ears, was no longer merely a test, but a companion in a dance of wit, courage, and absurdity. And somewhere in the swirling neon mist of the colony, a bond began to take root. a bond forged not through brute strength, but through laughter, ingenuity, and an unlikely respect that neither could yet name. Elias woke to the soft hum of the colony's energy grids, the neon mist settling lazily over the floating canopies like someone had spilled luminous paint and forgotten to clean it up. He stretched, cracking a shoulder that had taken more hits than he cared to count, and immediately spotted Thalira perched on a higher spire, long ears twitching in rhythm with the subtle vibration of the environment. She was watching him with that same unreadable expression he had grown strangely fond of, and he waved, grinning. "Morning, giant ears, sleep well, or do giant warriors need less REM than humans?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing in mock severity. "Your humor persists," she said, voice resonating like a soft drum beat. Elias laughed, hopping down to the platform nearest her. "Of course, humor is my weapon of choice. Deadly sometimes, mostly deadly to dignity, but hey, we adapt." The day began with a new kind of challenge. The rogue colony drones, still malfunctioning from their earlier misidentification, were swarming erratically, threatening both human and Lauren structures. Elias nudged his communicator. "Looks like our little practice session wasn't quite enough. Ready for round 2, partner." Thalira's ears flicked sharply. "I did not expect cooperation from one I was sent to humiliate." Elias grinned, pulling a compact energy net from his belt. "Hey, I'm full of surprises. Also, I'm cheap entertainment if nothing else." They moved together with a rhythm they had developed over the last day, her strength and reach complementing his agility and improvisation. Where before she had sought to dominate, now she covered him, guiding his leaps across the floating platforms, occasionally nudging him out of harm's way. Elias quipped as he swung on a tether. 3 meters tall and still the fashion sense of someone who ignores gravity. Impressive." She made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. The rogue drones were more aggressive this time, firing sporadic energy pulses that sizzled through the air. Elias directed Thalira toward the largest cluster. "Think of it like cleaning up after a messy dinner, except the dinner shoots lasers and the table floats." She lunged, striking with precision, knocking drones into the neon mist while Elias darted between them, deactivating control circuits with improvised gadgets. They laughed, him nervously, her, with that deep, melodic resonance that made him feel like even the fog around them was chuckling. After the last drone was deactivated, they stood on adjacent platforms, breathing hard but exhilarated. Elias looked at Thalira, noticing how her long ears twitched with each breath, her eyes softening in a way that humans rarely saw in warriors of her size. "You're not just strong," he said. "You're kind of incredible." She studied him in return, and for a moment, the teasing and banter of the last day melted into something heavier, something unspoken. "And you are, unlike any human I have known," she admitted. They descended together toward the colony center, where the council waited, still trembling from the spectacle of the last 48 hours. The colonists had expected humiliation, perhaps even tragedy, but Elias strode in first, Thalira just behind, and the two moved with a strange camaraderie that left everyone blinking. One council member, wide-eyed, muttered to another, Did he just survive her?" Elias grinned and waved. "Not just survived, we might even call it a collaboration. You're welcome." Thalira's ears flicked in amusement, and Elias couldn't resist a bow. "Shall I take questions or just accept applause now?" The council hesitated before realizing that no formal reprimand would suffice. The intended humiliation had transformed into a display of interspecies cooperation that none had predicted. Elias leaned toward Thalira. "See, nothing like a little humor and chaos to make history." She inclined her head slightly, her long ears brushing against the floating railing. "Perhaps there is merit in your methods, human." Over the following days, Elias found his routines subtly altered. His humor remained sharp, but he approached decisions with more patience, more observation. He had learned that courage alone did not define a warrior. Understanding, empathy, and even laughter could turn conflict into connection. Thalira, in turn, learned to temper instinct with thought, realizing that not every opponent needed to be crushed to assert dominance. Together, they patrolled the colony, often joking about trivial dangers, floating breakfast trays, and the occasional rogue drone, their partnership becoming a symbol of what could be achieved when differences were respected rather than feared. One evening, as the neon fog thickened into a luminous haze, Elias sat cross-legged on a floating spire while Thalira observed from above. He held up a cup of synth coffee. To surviving giant warriors and learning that they can also make excellent friends, he said. She tilted her head, considered the absurdity, and then reached out a hand to tap his cup with hers. Two unexpected alliances, she said. Elias smiled, thinking how strange it was that a mission meant to humiliate had instead taught him more than any battle or training exercise ever could. He realized he was no longer the wary, slightly jaded soldier who had first faced her. He was something broader now, someone who could navigate danger with humor, build trust where fear once ruled, and see the humanity, or in Thalira's case, the complexity in beings who seemed entirely alien. As the night settled over the floating colony, they shared stories and laughter, occasional jokes bouncing off neon foliage and mist, the kind that made danger feel less like a threat and more like an invitation to understand. Somewhere in the distance, rogue drones drifted inert, the colony hummed with renewed life, and the unlikeliest of bonds solidified between a human and a Lauren warrior. Elias knew this was only the beginning, but for now he could rest, knowing that fear had been replaced by respect, challenge had been replaced by camaraderie, and the galaxy had somehow become a slightly funnier, brighter, and more connected place. And as he looked up at Thalira, her long ears catching the neon light like sails in a gentle breeze, he realized that the mission, the test, the supposed humiliation, they had all failed. But in their failure, something infinitely more valuable had emerged: trust, laughter, and a friendship that no height, threat, or expectation